Today I'm going to make a couple of French press cozies, a custom order for friends, and I'll be using a pattern that I only used for a short period of time. I was hoping to pass it along so that you could make a simplified version if you're interested, and also if you watch the video you can learn more about these raw edge bindings that come into play with some of the items that we'll be making down the road, and also see a little bit more how I do the raw edge applique. This is the prototype that I made. The two that I'm making are for friends, and I want to make them really pretty elaborate in the quilting and the detail more so than this. And but that's not the difficulty. The difficulty is that this is a standard setup here, and theirs is the insulated type, which measures a little bit bigger. And so I have an even older French press that I'm gonna wrap with dish towels and tape and see if I can make it approximately the right size and use it as something to try the piece on as I'm going and to get some better measurements. But at any rate, the way this is designed, it's supposed to work like this, and I changed it a little after I made this prototype, but you're supposed to be able to set it on a pot holder, and then, like I say, this would go down even a little further than this prototype did, and close this top. It's got 2 layers of Insul-bright. And by the way, it's a good thing to keep one of whatever you've made so you can look. And I don't believe I ever changed this. I just used the 2 layers of Insul-bright. So when you close this, you're going through 4 layers. It's very similar to the way we did the top of the mitt 2 videos ago. It has a lot of similarities. I'm trying to build skills with these videos so that we can work up to the larger pieces. And so if you're watching these videos and really wanting to make some of the big projects with me later, you should have at least been acquainted with the ideas behind why we do things a certain way. Even if you didn't actually make it, you'll have heard how to do it and why we're doing it. And so it should make that easier when we get there. I haven't made this pattern in a long time, at least 3 or 4 years. And I'm also doing a more elaborate design than I've ever done before on the face of the sides. And so I'm quilting mine as desired. I advise that you just quilt yours however you would like, with even just a plain stipple. If you have a really gorgeous fabric, it's still going to be beautiful. I cut the top of my pieces at the contour of the pattern, and after working on it learned that the best thing to do is, as instructed earlier, make a quilt sandwich that is 21 by 12, layer your top, your 2 layers of Insul-bright, and then your lining fabric, and then quilt that. Okay. So it's very important to me that you actually be able to make these things if you decide you want to. And so I'm using something I have laying around that I quilted before, and I'm making it into well, kind of a mock-up. I guess I may actually finish this, even though it really only has 1 layer of cotton batting. I'm pinning my binding piece underneath, and that particular batik has no right or wrong side, which is true of most batiks. And then I'm going to put this here to stitch, and I'm going to mark it. Nice thing about marking with chalk is you can just kind of color over your line and then follow that clean edge that is left. So I can see that pretty well, and then I'm going to flip this and mark this side in the same manner. Now I happen to know that this stitching doesn't need to go all the way to the edge because this piece is going to curve here, and I could have done that already, but instead I'm just going to start my stitching in 1.5 inches or so, and then I have a good grip to get going without being too close to my needle. So I'm just going to free motion this. Or you can just stitch this with a regular foot and small stitches as I'm showing in the corner. This edge is somewhat forgiving, so don't worry if you don't go perfectly. Now I'm going to trim this. I think I wiggled over a little bit, but you can see I still have a nice good fat 1/8, and that'll be fine. Now I'm just turning this. I'm going to press it and I'll be right back. I do just want to take a minute to check my fit here. Yours will be stiffer than this one. This one is 1 layer of batting only. Alright. So this will fit on like this, and these will curve in like this. So I think this will be good. Okay, so if you look at the pattern here, the part we're going to use really ends in this neighborhood, and I actually need to move this line for the pattern. This is a draft of my pattern, but we're just going to quilt past this point, and I'm going to make a little mark to kind of show myself to quilt to about there, at least that far on each side. Here I am marking one of the cozies with a purple marker that disappears as it dries. I find this kind of marking is very helpful in cases where you don't want to wash or get your work wet. The blue marker I found can be very stubborn. Another viable option for this edge is to just use your regular foot and very small stitches and stitch 2 or 3 or 4 times up and down the edge, more or less following the contour. This will give you a workable edge. Just don't go too straight or you'll have trouble with fraying. And kind of pull this over so that it doesn't, you don't want to pull too much, but you don't want to have it be baggy. I do try to make sure that this stitching is double or triple everywhere, and I didn't mark it very well, but that's what I'm trying to do in the stitching. Like I said, this we're going for free form, so we're not going to worry about it too much. This type of free motion quilting on these edges is a little more difficult, and it is easier with a powerful machine like I have, but it is something that's doable and you can achieve beautiful results with it. So I encourage you to just practice your free motion quilting. Then we're going to trim this raw edge at a scant 3/16 of an inch, which is what I've found works very well for raw edges in the batiks, which is what I use mostly for these types of bindings. Across the face I use lots of fabrics, I use lots of layers, I use lots of stitches, and we'll talk about that when we do a project where we do that across the face of the work. Okay, so now you should have something that looks something like this, and we need to cut off these corners. And as I said, it will be the blue line on your pattern, but mine is in the wrong place right now. I'm going to have to go move this line. I discovered this when I was working on the video, and that's when I thought, I'm just going to test it. Okay, so that's what that's going to look like. I'll make sure it's actually 5/8, which is what I recommend there. But so what you're going to do is fold this in half, and where it wants to match up, you can fudge this a little bit. You want it to match up here, so fold that like that, and put your pattern on here. And then you can either print twice and actually cut this line, or you can just cut under it, which is what I'm going to do. Okay, so you can see what we're doing here. So here you can see we've got these pieces, and the most important place for them to mate is right where it comes, the seam is going to come off of here. And so I'm going to match that up. Even if it doesn't perfectly match everywhere else, I'm going to sort of fudge it, because this is the part that's going to be a continuation of this finished edge, and then it's going to turn into this corner. And so we're going to go ahead and pin a little bit here, since I'm sort of forcing my fabric to be a little bit different than it is. With all these layers of quilting, you can do that a little bit. You can sort of shift things the way you need, and sometimes you do it on purpose so that, like in this case, you want the binding to go around the back a little bit so that from the right side it doesn't show. Okay, so I'm going to repin this from the side so that I can stitch. But I'm going to put one extra pin up at the top past where I'm going to kind of help keep those edges mated up. When I stitch, I'm going to come down through here, and I'm going to round this out more as I stitch, and I'll also do that on the pattern. If you can see where this point is back here, the back of my foot, for me to stitch a continuous line with my bound edge, going down this way the way I'm going to, the back of my foot is still on, half of it is still on all the thicknesses of this project, and so I don't have to prop my foot. I strategically design things that way, because when you're in a hurry to make things that are beautiful and will wash well, you want to make designs where you don't need a lot of extra tools that you need to bring in just to make things decent quality. You want to spend your time on artistic design elements that add to the appreciation of the piece, not just make your construction difficult. If my foot were really leaning off the back, I would either prop or use the go slow and walk method. So once again, we're trimming this at 3/16. Which is nice because it allows you to not have to clip corners, but stuff won't rip out, especially this quilted stuff. It's a different matter if you've got a little thin layer of something. All fabrics behave and perform differently. So it's situational. So now is a good time to try your piece on. You'll have to cuff the bottom because it's a little long. And then you fold that down, and ideally with the Insul-bright it'll stay closed even when the plunger is still up, but if it won't, it'll just be able to be sealed after that couple of, I can't remember how many minutes you wait to push down the plunger when you're making coffee. But at any rate, you want to decide how long to make this bottom, and it's going to end up the length you trim it at, because our our binding doesn't fold anything up. Our binding actually folds around from the back side. And so I'm going to put a pin in this right here. So to trim this, what I've got here is, my piece is pretty much square, and I'm lining up here with a black line, and I've got my pin on this edge, and I'm just going to cut down that. And once I've trimmed that off, I'll be able to hem this edge. It's right side to wrong side is essentially what this is. And when I'm done sewing, I want to be in this neighborhood over here because of the way I'm going to decoratively bind this edge. And so I'm going to sew this down like this. So if you didn't catch that, what you're doing is turning your piece inside out and wrapping the binding strip that you have left around the bottom and then stitching it on. It's much easier if you have one of these free arms, and so use that if you have one, and just stitch it on at 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 or even 1/2 inch. It's up to you because it's going to wrap around the front, and you're going to have plenty of area to do some decorative stitching on the front no matter what you choose, because you've got 3 inches to work with here. Stitch this on as neatly as possible, but again, it's going to be your cut line that is going to shape the bottom of this. So I'm going to pull this up and it'll fold onto the inside, and I'm going to take it to the iron and press that because I want it to be taut. So here this is, and I'm just pressing it out while I'm in here. I like to press with a lot of steam, as you've probably noticed, and I like to use my hands a lot to shape pieces as I go, as I'm sewing, as I'm pressing. Here I've already started quilting. If you're feeling ready for this and you feel confident that you can do this kind of a decorative free motion quilted binding, go ahead and go for it. It's a little harder working with something like this that's essentially a tube rather than something flat like the oven mitt. If you're not ready for this, just stitch some lines around the bottom and try not to go too straight. You can go straight, but then I would advise that you actually cut this piece on the bias so that you won't have the kind of fraying that you will if you just cut this straight on the grain from selvage to selvage. I always try to take a minute and plan how the overlap is going to happen, and doing this with a piece of chalk helps you remember what you want it to do. It's so easy to look at that, make a plan, and then go ahead and do something completely different. I mark my work a lot with chalk, as you probably have noticed. Then you'll want to trim this edge between 1/8 and 3/16. There is a final step that I like to do with these raw edges on pieces where I've already washed the piece but I've added a raw edge. I take a nail brush that I bought specifically for this purpose, and I scrub the raw edge with the brush and try to rough up the frayed edges that would come loose in the wash. And then I use my little scissors and I trim the edge, and I use my lint roller to clean it up. And that way, when they first wash it, it won't have a really ratty appearance in that area. I feel that I'm able to loosen enough of what will loosen in the wash for this to be an acceptable compromise for not wasting the resource of washing the pieces repeatedly. before they go out. An old friend commented on Facebook that my lighting should be soft and abundant or something like that, and to avoid it looking like I'm working in a cave with a spotlight or something. And very nice of him to suggest improvements, but you know, I'm doing this stuff on the fly, and so I'm gonna settle for if you can see it and if I can remember to zoom in at the right time so that you can really tell how to do it. I'm gonna call it good. I'm sorry. Let me know if you're getting tired of the song that I'm playing under the videos, because to me I don't even hear it anymore, but if I can use a different one for some of these.